Hey everybody, so we are now up to Bill's story. If you've been following along with the Big Book study, we covered the entire doctor's opinion and we found out what the doctor had to say about the nature of this illness, the allergy. He defined the allergy as us being abnormally different than normal people. And in Bill's story, we see that feelings are a big part of Bill's story. And it's divinely written in 16 pages. The first 8 pages of Bill's story are his progression into this illness. And the second 8 pages of Bill's story are his progression into recovery. So here's what it says. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. He was always trying to feel better, right? Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last. And in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. So Bill Wilson is 22 years old and he discovers liquor for the first time. And it makes him feel part of life at last. In time, we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. So we can see that he is turning to alcohol to cure his feelings of loneliness. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is never forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Strong warning that alcohol kills. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. 22. And a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast empires, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. So already we can see that Bill fancies himself a leader, and he's a visionary. Little does he know, he would later be used as a visionary for AA. Not too grandiose, is he? So we're seeing that Bill's loneliness made him turn to a relationship with alcohol. Spirits were his answer to a spiritual malady. Now we can see where Bill is impulsive, and if you're like me, when I read this story, I can truly identify. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. He was part of life at last. Seems like the Big Book is telling you 1,000 things, when in reality it's telling you a few things 1,000 times, because we need that reinforcement. I'd proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of my finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. Potential alcoholic that he was. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of great genius conceived their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought was so derived. So forebodings is another word for fears, and I don't know if you've ever met anybody that was on the marijuana maintenance plan or smoked pot. They would tell people that they conceived their best ideas when stoned. Same thing with Bill Wilson, you know. And I'm not sure if he was born an alcoholic or he developed it later on, but somewhere along the line he crossed the invisible fence, the line, and it doesn't matter how we start out, it's where we all wind up. So at some point he activated the allergy. By the time I had completed the law course, I knew the law was not for me. So we can see he's impulsive. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would all but cut me to ribbons. I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn it in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So out of this alloy, which is a mixture of drink and speculation, which is stocks, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. That's alcohol. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. Well, back in the 30s, $1,000 might as well have been $1 million. It was a lot of money. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. Those were utility stocks. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I developed theories that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. So Bill Wilson was one of the original stock analysts. He would go to bars where people would drink, and there were stockholders, and he would ask questions, and that's how he would procure his reports for Wall Street. Okay. We gave up our positions and off we rode on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of financial reference service. So they're painting a picture of a motorcycle with a sidecar, but what they don't let you know is Lois is driving. Bill Wilson is in the sidecar, drunk. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had had some success at speculation, stocks, so we had a little money. But once we worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on a small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day, probably the rest of his life. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. a profit, not earnings. So we can see clearly that money is important to Bill Wilson, and his inadequacy made a need in Bill to be accepted. As his successes grow, so does his alcoholism. And we'll stop there, and part 2 will be next.